we go to Road America, and I think it's a good way to segue into track barrier systems and corner cutting. And it's a good way also to segue off of GoPro Motorplex with the Stars Championship Series. What was interesting over at the Stars Championship Series at GoPro, actually here with this picture, if it will load here from Aaron. So this picture is from the outside of turn number 6 at GoPro Motorplex. Typically, and they've tried a bunch of different ways because in the past they've had rental carts run off the racetrack, eat up the grass over and over again. They're spending tens of thousands of dollars on sod, probably. I don't know what the number is, but I can imagine between the manpower and shutting the track down and having to hope no one runs over the new sod as you plant it to replant the grass and the rental carts going off. They said it'd be cheaper to just go ahead and pave concrete patches. And it's paved a lot of runoff around the racetrack that purists to the sport, that like racetracks like Newcastle, like Road America and stuff like that, have been annoyed with, because now that runoff makes the corner easier. You go over the curb and onto the concrete. So they've done a bunch of different ways to try and limit track limits. They put plastic barriers at the exit of the track. They put sleeping policemen, which are those kind of plastic or even built-in concrete bumps that Homestead did for a little while. And then at the Stars event in turn 6, they completely took the barriers out. They only had the barriers in the final corner. And I think that was because the brick wall is pretty close on that front straightaway, so they don't want the guys going way wide there. But they went wide here. We go to Road America. It's been a talking point every year that we go here. The turn 1-2 chicane specifically has a ton of grass runoff in between all of it. And almost every year that we go to this racetrack, there's guys cutting it, trying to get away with something. And for a while, the penalty, the worst you'd get was a 4-position penalty for blatant cutting. So like Jake French in 2020, I think, in KA, if not 2021, realized he was starting 20th. And I hate to call it Jake, but he's a friend of the show, and he knows what he did. Went from 20th up to 4th or 5th because he didn't have the pace to run up front. He knew he was only going to get a 4-position penalty, so even though he faded back to 8th or 9th by the end of the main, he still ended up better than where he would have been trying to start where he was and balance off the pace. So the question here to all of our panel, and we'll start at the top here with Aaron as a guy who's a Wisconsinite, basically. Big grass area. We've had pylons there in the years past. The pylons get run over, broken, and then they're charred. And you go over that and it pops a tire. There's been plastic barriers thought about. There's cones. There's nothing. There's tires. What would you do if you are the czar for the weekend for the series? What would you prefer?
I've had this discussion before, and so I remember the first year that we went back after the repave. This was 2018, I think, 17 or 18. And I was still running. I was good friends with Josh Oates at the time, still am. But I was running with him, and we just cut the turn 2 chicane. We'd get our right 2 tires over the curb, and we pretty much cut the whole thing, drag a bunch of dirt onto the track. They yelled at me for that, and I'd cut the track in like 3 other spots because you could. And so they put this giant plastic barrier right at the apex, just inside of the curb, and then somebody smashed that and bent their car, so they got rid of that. And they tried a lot of stuff for it, like you said. My realistic, not even realistic necessarily, my idea was just if you cut the corner there, that lap doesn't count. You didn't complete a full lap of the track. You just essentially skipped 3 turns out there. So you have a right, you have a left, and then you have a right-hand curve to kind of line back up where the straightaway was going. So you didn't complete that part of the track. You didn't complete a full lap, but your entire lap is DQ'd. You're just a lap behind now. And you know, that's kind of, you have to go that severe with punishment just to keep people from trying to do it. And you can go through there and say, like, all right, there was a wreck, you got pushed off, whatever, and you can have some margin for that. But I think you got to be pretty strict with penalties and be pretty heavy-handed with the penalties that you're going to give out for cutting the track in those instances. Because when I was running last year, I lost 20, 15, 20, maybe even 25 spots on the start because I drove through the chicane like normal, and I'd look over and see a bunch of people cutting the corner.
I think last year we saw was a lot worse than in 2020. Like, people really started realizing that you could take advantage of just clear on cutting the chicane on the start, and the worst you're going to get is a 4-spot penalty. And I mean, in an ideal world, you put barriers there, you just flat out make it to where if someone cuts that, they're going in the barrier, no hesitation. But there's money involved. People are going to be mad about bending up their cars. So I'm not a huge fan of the barrier approach, but I also think putting cones there is kind of a useless approach as well. So I think kind of the way to do it would be, like Aaron said, you have to make it to where the consequences of cutting it are significantly worse than what the rewards of it are. And I mean, I think the not counting the lap is a good solution to it. I would also say potentially adding on time penalties of 15, 20 seconds. Because I remember back at GoPro in 2015, there was a situation where Brandon Lemke missed a corner in turn 8 in the rain, cut into turn 11 there. And if you remember, between the hairpin and turn 11, there's an area where you can do that. And WK at the time, I think, gave him a 40-second penalty, which obviously, like, you don't gain 40 seconds. But if you put that amount of time on it to where they're losing way more than they would gain by cutting it, I think that at that point, you start to see the benefit. If I was running this weekend, I would say a blanket 15-second penalty to anyone that's caught turn caught blatantly cutting turn one. And if it's just a minor cut, like the four wheels off kind of cutting the inside curving, if they don't have the barrier there, then I think that's more of a 2-position penalty type of deal. But certainly the blatant cutting on the start, you have to penalize pretty severely.
I definitely agree. I think it's gotten, like Aaron said, it's gotten worse over the last couple of years. I mean, I haven't raced there since 2008. So I've obviously been there pretty much to every race that's been there since. Yeah, there is no perfect fix. I mean, the perfect fix would be that area is paved and you actually had like a barrier system that they had to go through, kind of similar to Formula One, where it was kind of pushed up the hill a little bit and they had time to slow down on the start. But Emery's right. I mean, you have to do something that's pretty aggressive time-wise. And, you know, if you have a GoPro on, you can appeal it. You know, you maybe at the start put 2 or 3 extra people up there just to watch, to see who's cutting it egregiously or, you know, wasn't really forced out there. I know some guys are pretty good at making it look like at GoPro in turn one, you know, you can make it look like you were forced out. Probably guilty of that 1 or 2 times, but it is what it is. It's part of the sport anyways. But yeah, a bigger penalty than 4 positions or even 5 seconds needs to be in place.
Honestly, if it were me, I personally hate time penalties, especially from stars. I just put a barrier all the way across and leave a little bit of room closer to this chain so it wouldn't be like right on the curbs, because I hate like deciding whether they cut it or they were forced off. It's just like normally you don't like, it's hard to get forced off that far, because I know like people like Annunziata, he just full throttle.
You know, there is an old school fix. It wouldn't be the safest in the world, but you can always do the old school sand or stones into turn one. Maybe leave 2 feet of grass all the way through, and then they're not going to want to go through there. Granted, there's the risk of them flipping because it's a long straight, but if you want to go
street racer, you coming out.
Maybe a little, put water barriers up and curbs, but no, in all seriousness, I mean, I think it needs to be a stricter time penalty. I mean, like you said, the 4 spots don't really do much because guys will cut through it and say, what the heck, there's 4 spots, and I'm just going to be, if I win, I'm starting 4th or 5th. I don't know. You can go extreme and say half a lap. So if they're doing 50, I don't know what times to do there. So they're doing 50-second laps. Well, congratulations, you got 25 seconds added to it because you had to pass 3 or 4 people. But I think sand is the best way to go.
I wasn't thinking. I'm kind of, the plastic barriers get knocked over, the cones get knocked over, the pylons have been kind of knocked, so there's not a good way there. If they're going to go hard with the penalty, then it's got to probably start with the first round of pre-finals. Like the first few classes need to have a lot of guys probably get crucified, because anytime a series like threatens big penalties or comes in and we get the lashing at the drivers meeting of, oh, you guys better behave, you guys better, race each other clean, don't cut the racetrack. And then the first session, everyone's going to kind of test those race directors and see if the officials are actually going to come down hard with what we have. So a time penalty is obviously great in theory, but there's going to be probably in the first few races, if that's the way things were done and nothing else changes and it's just a hefty time penalty that's threatened at this level, I don't think that's going to scare enough guys to keep people from doing it. I think the officials would get tested. I think a couple people will probably slip through, but if enough guys get crucified in the pre-finals Saturday, I think it could be fine to get through the weekend.